Okay, today we're going to finish up the notes from last week and all the worksheets. So you can watch the videos. Here's a link to the first video for the intro to logarithms. And now I'm going to do logarithm notes for today. After you finish both of these, make sure you finish all the worksheets. Okay, this was the second page of the notes from Friday. We already did this first graph, so I'm going to do the second graph. Okay, anytime you do these, anytime you're going to graph logarithm, you do the same thing. So you're going to graph x and y for the original function. You can use -2, -1, 0, 1, 2 for your x values. To get your y values, pull up the calculator, type in the function. I'm going to put parentheses around the fraction because our function is f of x equals 1/2 raised to the power of x. Then I'm going to look at the table and see what my y values are for the x values that we're using. Okay, so for -2, 4, -1, 2, 0, 1, 1, 0.5 or 1/2, 2, 0.25 or 1/4. Okay, I'm going to graph those points. -2, 1, 2, 3, 4, -1, 2, 0, 1, 1.5, 2.25. I'm going to do the best I can with this graph here. Oh, that's not very good. I know it's, okay, it doesn't really have that little hump in it. I know it's approaching the axis, but isn't going to reach it. It's the best I can do, probably. Now we're going to graph the inverse. To get the inverse function, to graph it, all you have to do is just swap your x and y. So our x values are now going to be 4, 2, 1, 0.5, 0.25, and our y values will be -2, -1, 0, 1, 2. To get the function, f of x means y, so I'm going to take y equals 1/2 to the x power, and I'm going to swap the x and the y. So now I have x equals 1/2 to the power of y. Well, I can turn that into a logarithm. The inverse function of an exponential function is a logarithmic function. That's what we've been talking about for the last couple of days. You go back and forth from one to the other. So if I rewrite this, that'll make it a little easier to figure out what it's going to be. So now we know what our base is. So log base 1/2, and log is exponent. So this is the inverse function. See, we've solved for y. So this is the function that we're going to be graphing as the inverse. And there are the points for it. So for this one, it's going to be, oh, this is hard to see, 4, -2, 2, -1, 1, 0. Notice how the y-intercept here was 0, 1, and now our x-intercept here is 1, 0. Okay, now I'm going to graph 0.5, 1, and 0.25, 2. So this graph is going to go I cross the line when it's not really supposed to. I'll shift this whole thing over a little bit. It should look more like that. Did I do something wrong here? Or -2. Okay. I'm not, for some reason this isn't looking right, but I'm having trouble focusing right now. Okay, that's how you're going to graph the functions. Just make sure that when you do these, you swap the x and the y, you graph them, and you also write what the inverse function is. Now on the next page, this is where you are going to write the inverse functions. We're going to skip 3 and 4 on this, but you need to try to do 2. We didn't do it on Friday, but give it a try on the one on the notes. To find the inverse, you're going to write this as y equals log of x plus 2. Notice there's no base on this. Anytime you don't have a base, it's base 10. Remember the one we talked about you could use in the calculator. So I'm going to rewrite this as log of x plus 2 equals y. Now, I need to write this as an exponent because the inverse function of a logarithm, the inverse of a log is an exponential function, okay? So our base is 10 and log is exponent. So our exponent, okay, back up. I skipped a step. Sorry, I'm trying to hurry. Need to swap the x and the y. We have to reverse them. So x equals log y plus 2. Now I'm going to rewrite it as log of y plus 2 equals x. Okay, so our base is 10. Log is exponent. So our exponent is x. And we're taking the exponent of y plus 2. So 10 to the x equals y plus 2. To solve for y, all we're going to do is subtract 2 from both sides. So you'll have 10 to the x power minus 2 equals y. Okay, so now you can do these on the worksheet. Finish both worksheets. If you have any other questions, you're on the computer, look online, figure out how to do them, okay? And we're moving on to properties of logarithms, addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division tomorrow.